Greetings, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am so glad you're here. Thanks for tuning in. Tonight, we'll be finishing off In Miserable Slavery, the Thomas Thistlewood Diaries. We're going to read chapter 11 and the appendix. Chapter 11, Toward the End, 1781 to 1786, when he died. Introduction. In this final chapter, we find Mr. Thistlewood battered by ill fortune, but resilient almost to the end. Successive floodings ruined his gardens, and the weather brought more than the usual incidents of illnesses among his slaves. Clearly, he felt that he could not go on much longer on the pen, and he began to make arrangements for the purchase of a smaller property, but he did not live to complete the transaction. And by losing him, we also lose what contact we have had with Fibba, Lincoln, Bess, Blind Mary, and the rest. In these 6 years, Thomas Thistlewood was to decline in health, and occasional good business and accompanying optimism notwithstanding in fortune. He began the year in bad health. His 1st of January accounts indicated little damage from the October hurricane, but he had lost his buildings, his crops, and trees, and a few sheep. Monday, January 29th, 1781. Suki wanting this morning, but soon came. At noon, served my negroes each a quart of English peas. Monday, February 12th, 1781. Made watchmen, house negroes, and field negroes pay me a bit apiece for stealing my watermelons. Flogged Lincoln today. Wednesday, February 14th, 1781. Had Dick flogged for letting them plant potato slips in the wrong end of the ground. Remember, Dick was the driver at this time. He and Strap went back and forth in that role. Wednesday, February 21st, 1781, sent an advertisement of Breadnut Pen and all accompanying buildings to be sold to the publisher of the Montego Bay paper with $3 to insert it as long as he can afford. Also sent another to Mr. Baker at Savannah Lamar to stick up in his office. To be sold in the parish of Westmoreland, a small settlement known by the name of Breadnut Island Pen, situated about 2 miles to the westward of Savannah Lamar, containing 160 acres, between 60 and 70 of which are high land and are Negro grounds and pastures. Very clean. Most of the rest is a rich, open morass, great part of which, in the dry season, is good pasturage. It affords fish of various sorts, more especially mudfish, also crabs, and in the season, plenty of wild fowl. There is only the ruins of a dwelling house at present, but the proprietor has already collected a sufficient quantity of stone upon a very eligible spot for building a dwelling house, from which there is a prospect of the shipping in Savannah Lamar Harbor and the country all around. There is likewise a lime kiln built and fit to set fire to. Also, along the above, 26 or 28 Negroes, 15 of which are field Negroes, the rest fishermen, house Negroes, watchmen, and children. Likewise, 25 head of horned cattle and about 60 sheep. For particulars apply to the proprietor, Thomas Thistlewood, on the premises spot, whose only motive for wanting to dispose of the above is his ill state of health requiring him to leave the island. So only cash or good bills of exchange can be took in payment. Whoever such place may suit and can comply or agree with the above terms may have it exceeding reasonable. He was trying to offload Breadnut Island Penn because he wasn't in a position to continue the upkeep between the hurricanes, the slaves running off, and then him continually contracting venereal diseases. Greetings, Redo 9002. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm so glad you're here. But as far as we know, there were no interested persons, and Thistlewood remained in occupation until his death. There was, though, a later indication that even if he failed to sell the pen, circumstances, particularly of his health, would compel him to move to a smaller property. Tuesday, March 6th, 1781. Lincoln brought a few bullheads and goddams about 12:30, ordered him to work in the field, made Dick fisherman, and Strap the driver. Wednesday, March 7th, 1781. It is said fine flour at Bristol in 1779 cost 12 shillings per hundred, and 1780 16 shillings, for which we give 50 shillings and 3 pounds per hundred here. Thursday, March 8th, 1781, laid out 20 bits in bread, which made my Negroes pay me on the 12th of February for stealing my watermelons, shared the bread amongst them, and gave them some salt fish also. So this was his attempt at being benevolent because he bought bread with the 20 bits that he made them pay him for stealing his watermelons. And he took that money and bought their provisions with it. So they bought their own food. On Tuesday, March 13th, 1781, clamminess and suspect I see a staining and feel symptoms. He's talking about his venereal disease. Flogged Nanny and Myrtilla for scalding and disturbing Mr. Wilson, and Strap for letting them. Friday, March 23rd, 1781. This morning, a Negro woman of Mr. Myler's from Myler's Field, named Mary, came with a complaint that Sally had, last night, they being shipmates, enticed her to sleep in her husband's house at Mr. Hayward's, and this morning robbed her of her pocket knife with 2 knives in it and her victuals. Found the pocket on Sally and the knives, which returned to the woman, but could learn nothing concerning the victuals. Gave Sally a good flogging. The woman was very impudent indeed while I was endeavoring to right her. So he felt like the woman was ungrateful for what he was trying to do, beating his slave and putting her back in line. Friday, March 30th, 1781, Sally, who he had just beat a few days earlier, Sally, wanting this morning, sent Pompey to look for her, but he can hear nothing of her. Next day, Solon was given a ticket and dispatched to continue the search. Sally eluded capture until Friday, April the 4th, when Salam brought her home. Thistlewood flogged and marked her and put a pothook on her. He recorded that she was just 60 inches and 1/2 high. So she was about 5 feet tall. Sunday, April 1st, 1781. But few provisions today at market. My Negroes brought pumpkins for the most part. Toyer and Kwaku have been the chief support of the Negroes in this parish since the last 4 months. Now, both pumpkins, Toyer and Kwaku have been the chief supports of Negroes in the parish. It says here that both are root crops, according to Cassidy and LePage, who make no reference to Kwaku as a root crop. Toyer, or Taya, was and is commonly used name for the many varieties of cocoa root which they list. Toyer, or Taya, heads require boiling 8 or 10 hours, and the water to be several times shifted, or else they will scratch and itch the throat abundantly. The fingers are better than the heads and don't take so long boiling. Kwakus are very good, especially the fingers. The kwaku leaves are very large, and the toyer or teya leaves less leaves less and are rounder and have a purplish cast, but there are several sorts of each. On Tuesday, April 4th, very unwell today, pain about the heart, also pains about the testicle, groins, and other nether parts, and, as it were, puffed up. His records of sexual activity reflect his poor state of health. In January, 5 times, twice with Fibba, twice with Bess, and once with Phoebe. In February, not at all. In March, twice, once with Fibba and once with Peggy. Now in April, twice with Phoebe and Fibba, and not until the end of August when he took Fibba twice, Bess twice, and Sally once, did he manage to equal his performance. Phoebe, whom he had taken on the 18th of April, though she was then laid up with her big belly, produced a daughter on the 23rd of the same month. So can you imagine he has this venereal disease, he's having sex with a pregnant woman, and she gives birth about a week after he had sex with her? Saturday, April 14th, 1781. Flogged Joe for leaving the cookroom and buttery and going with the grass to sell last night. Also had Pompey flogged for letting the cattle break into the trumpet tree bottom, recently replanted with a variety of garden seeds, and for getting drunk in the night and making the most infernal noise I ever heard. Made my Negroes work all day for making noise last night and disturbing me greatly. Jimmy bit Phoebe's lips. Now, Jimmy and Phoebe were a couple, and they had their marital problems intermittently going back and forth with one another. And he beat his slaves out of frustration because of what his cows did. Can you imagine a situation where he continues to punish the enslaved people for what the animals were doing, as though they have control over what the animals decide to do if they're not properly locked up? Greetings, Forecast. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm so glad you're here. Early in May, he suspected his slaves of having slaughtered one of his cattle, whose horns and carcass he found in his morass beside a much used path. But there was no proof, and he seems not to have taken any action. The field Negroes, or most of them, were busy removing all the blown down timbers and hauling or carrying them up on the hill where he intended to build. Others, including Myrtilla, Sally, and Peggy, were weeding the pasture. On Saturday, May 19th, 1781, gave the Negroes today, but first made them pay me 16 bits, the suspicious ones a bit piece for stealing and selling my limes as fast as they fall, so that I am yet forced to buy, although I should have enough if they would let them alone. Crumba, Jimmy Stewart's mother, come to see Fibber. On the 30th of May, a long-standing and good friend, Mr. Hayward, paid a visit. He was going to England. He left £200 cash with Mr. Thistlewood to feed his Negroes, spent a pleasant morning, went away, and returned at about 7 p.m. At that time, he bid Fibber goodbye, as he did not think he should come again before he went off. Sorry I am to lose such a friend. Mr. Hayward's departure was to be more immediate and more absolute than anticipated. On Monday, June 4th, he became very ill, vomiting blood, and that evening he died. He was buried in the Savannah Lamar Chapel, attended by about 30 whites and a great many of color. He left three children, Bessie, aged 21, and Jenny and George. Mr. Thistlewood once more became deeply involved in the affairs of a deceased friend. In mid-June, Joe was in trouble, having made a strange mistake about a bag of cocoa he had been sent to bring from Mrs. Myler, but had apparently escaped punishment for. Fibber always excuses and hides Joe's faults and blunders, and had words with her about it. She seems very fond of him. Now Joe was about their son's age, and Fibber had just lost her child. So you got to remember, she was probably still grieving, and she transferred those feelings of maternal compassion onto Joe. Monday, June 18th, 1781, Burton's Mary is wanting. She had been ill during the previous week of her belly. Tuesday, June 19th, 1781, Lincoln ill yet, gave Charity a dose of rhubarb. Burton's Mary come home this morning, complains ill of her belly. She has got the clap, I believe. I wonder who she got it from. Wednesday, June 20th, 1781, flogged Strap for not minding the Negroes good. So this is an instance where a driver was punished because they weren't driving the other enslaved people hard enough under them. And although the driver was a privileged position on the plantation because they got more food and provisions usually than the other enslaved people, they were subject to the same terror and horrors that the other enslaved people were subject to. At the end of June, Egypt Estate was sold to Mr. Robert Kenyon, but for a month or two more, the Copeses remained in residence. The house at Petheron was not ready. Saturday, July 21st, 1781, damsel killed her hog and made me a present of the head. Bought a leg of her, 4.5 pounds at 5 bits. Now sold at 10 dittos per pound. The whole 50-pound weight in 12 small pieces comes to 63 bits, which she received. This is another instance of an enslaved person having resources and going to market with their resources to buy what they were able to buy and to sell what they were able to sell. One of the things my mother said before she passed away was that the housing crash did a lot to help Black people who had the money but were not allowed to buy houses in places where they wanted to buy houses. So this was an instance of the enslaved person had money to buy things, but they were not able to buy whatever they wanted. And I just wanted to make that parallel between then and now. There are still things that we may have the money to buy, like a membership in an organization that we are not eligible to buy because they have legacy rules and they have guidelines about who can and cannot purchase this thing. Thursday, July 26, 1781. This evening, my Negroes come in a body to ask me for clothes. So he hadn't even been dressing them appropriately, because what he's saying is that they all came together to his house to ask him to buy clothes. This request very probably followed losses in the 1780 hurricane, and now there was to be another one, though less devastating. On Wednesday, August the 1st, 1781, walked about all night as I every instant expected my house and other buildings all to go. My dwelling house was soon so damaged that my bed, papers, books, and other effects were all as wet as if they had been dipped in the sea. Many things broke and spoiled. Tuesday, August the 2nd, August the 2nd, 1781, so tempestuous could do nothing. Once again, trees were blown down, gardens swamped and destroyed, Negro houses and outbuildings all damaged, corn and plantain crops lost. Once again, the damage in Savannah Lamar and the West was severe. Stores and houses blown down. McKay's wharf carried away vessels driven ashore, and food and cane crops flattened on many estates. On Egypt, the still house and the trash house were down, shingles blown off the boiling house and the great house, a mule killed, and as elsewhere, another great flooding rain. Thistlewood ranked the hurricanes. September 11th, 1751. Violence or force, not velocity. Say 6. October the 3rd, 1780. Say 10. August the 1st, 1781. Say 4.5. And the greatest I ever saw at home, about a 3. On Breadnut Island Pen, Mr. Thistlewood set about to build a house that would, he hoped, better withstand future weather. And to make doubly sure, his plans included a separate storm house, which they might all repair when the next hurricane struck. He ordered 800 feet of hardwoods, roughly 5 inches squared, to be delivered to Cabarita Bridge at 57 shillings, 6 dittos per 100 feet. He bought flagstones, window frames, and bricks. He paid William Lewis Esquire £50 for 114 cedar boards, 12 feet long, and 1.5 feet wide. In the midst of all this, he did not neglect his reading. Wednesday, August the 15th, 1781, Mr. Nicholas Blake lent me a manuscript oration in praise of General Guise, wrote by Matt Lewis, Billy Lewis of Cornwall's brother. I think it is very ingenious and well wrote. He is said to be very clever. This was another reference to Matthew G. Monk Lewis, a well-known author of novels in the Gothic style and of the Journal of a West India Proprietor, published after his death in 1834. At the end of August, his slaves got their year cloth and thread, which they had come demanding a month before. Monday, September the 24th, 1781, Mary Wanting. It seems she went up on the mountain to see Robin and come away yesterday at dinner time. The forecast says, you see that now with black supervisors, they will go harder for the owner who actually makes the money. Yes, you do see that in regards to drivers. Excuse me. Mary had, however, failed to turn up at the pen, and Solon was given a ticket to go in search of her. At night he returned without Mary and nursing a bite from Mr. Tomlinson's dog. The search was renewed, but Mary remained at large until early October. Thursday, September the 27th, 1781, Abba miscarried. Sunday, September 30th, 1781, that evening I had Joe flogged for impudence to me, appears to be drunk, and had Bristol corrected for lying and impudence. Saturday, October 6, 1781, this morning had Mary flogged, put her on a steel collar with a few links of chain to it, and marked her left cheek with my brand, which are 2 T's and an upside down triangle. Then let her go. Here she soon set off for the mountain again. He beat and branded her on her face. 4 days later, she was brought in from the mountain by Strap and given another flogging. Wednesday, October the 10th, 1781, flogged Dick for selling all the fish and bringing me none. So by this point in time, Dick was a fisherman, and similar to Chubb, who had been the fisherman before, when you're the fisherman, you often get flogged for the lake not giving up the yield that Thistlewood wanted. He wanted plenty of fish, and so instead of bringing him the fish, he brought him money, and that pissed him off. On the 20th, Suki hurt her neck while bringing timber up from the seaside to Thistlewood's house site. He sent her to Miss Bessie Grant to be bled, and on her return gave her a calabash juice and rum to drink, and rubbed her with rum and soap and antidote, cocoon scraped. Now, cocoon scraped is a bean which, when scraped, is used to treat bites, stings, and other pains, according to Cassidy's 1971 book. In the evening, she suffered a bad fit but recovered. By the end of December, Thistlewood was ready to start building his new house. On the last day of the year, at about 11:30 a.m., Mr. Turner and 3 Negroes and Mr. Sanders with 2 Negroes, the hired construction teams, arrived and work commenced. It had been an expensive year and a half for Mr. Thistlewood, and local sales of Penn produce in 1781 reflected the setbacks following the hurricanes. He sold only about 35 pounds worth, and on January 1st, 1782, his ready cash was nil, which means he was probably borrowing money from his slaves again, right? But the flock of sheep had recovered. From 68 on January 1st, 1781, they had increased to 83 by the 31st of December. His slaves, to whom he had issued only 30 tickets in 1781, and remember, at least a third of those tickets were sent out and spent and given because enslaved people were running away. He issued only 30 tickets in 1781, though discomfited by shortages of food, were in no worse health than usual, and their number had been increased by the birth of Phoebe's child. So Phoebe's child lived, right? That's that natural increase we talk about. Mr. Thistlewood himself was still not strong. Added to rheumatic pains, a deafness in his right ear, and dimness of the eyes, he had, at the end of November and early December, suffered the additional discomfort of a small fish bone stuck a little way within the anus, causing a painful swelling to rise. How did he get a small fish bone stuck in his behind? What was he doing with the fish? Nonetheless, he still dined out at Christmas and left something for his slaves. On Monday, December the 24th, 1781, that evening I shot a heifer to give among my Negroes. She was a little lame from the Negroes throwing her down and hurting her when a calf having a sore navel and has never throve as she ought to. Earlier in December, there had been celebrations over a piece of war news. Wednesday, December 5th, 1781, the hulk of the ship Austin Hall burnt tonight by way of a bonfire upon account of hearing Clinton has joined Cornwallis. But by Christmas, the mood was dampened. On Monday, December 24th, 1781, people terribly alarmed for fear of an invasion. On Tuesday, December 25th, 1781, it is said Governor Darling is returned to town, could not get the windward passage for Frenchmen of war cruising in the way. And on the Penn, Pompey, perhaps moved by the spirit of his time, demonstrated his own firepower. On Saturday, December the 29th, Pompey frequently lets out loud farts that we hear him plain and loud to my house and cookroom, about 130 to 140 yards from his hut. What was he eating that he was able to let out such loud farts? By the end of May 1782, the fears of invasion had almost been removed by the defeat of the French fleet under the Count de Grasse by Lord Rodney. Thistlewood, though much involved in the victory chatter and celebrations, was faced with considerable domestic problems. His first need was for ready money to pay for the rehabilitation of his pen, and particularly the building of his new house. Moreover, because of the general devastation of provision grounds and shortages of imported foodstuffs, the costs of feeding his slaves and his own household would for a time greatly increase. And at the beginning of the year, he was again more unwell than usual. Early February, he noted, I ride out o' mornings, but this morning could scarcely sit on my horse. Following the October 1780 hurricane, appeals for assistance had resulted in a grant in aid from the British government. In Westmoreland, individuals were proportionately recompensed, and Thistlewood's share was an estimated £140, 5 shillings, but the money was a long time coming. On Wednesday, January the 9th, 1782, he sold his share to Mr. Rankin, a bookkeeper, for 51 half joes and 5 shillings, which equaled £127 and 15 shillings. So instead of that 140 shillings, he took a loss. Now, a Joanna or a Joe is a Portuguese gold coin equal to £5, 10 shillings, which is equal to 4 pistoles. So he took a loss because he sold his for £127 and 15 shillings instead of waiting for that £140 and 5 shillings. A week later, he sold at Vendu some bits and pieces, a small dripstone for £2, a rifle barrel for £5, 5 shillings, a fowling piece for £1, 5 shillings, after paying the 5% commission to the vendor, bought him £8, 1 shilling, and 6 dittos. Later in the year, there were to be more such goods disposed of. Other more important sources of income were his imports, mainly logwood and rum, sales locally of various imported goods, and with a good eye for business, these in 1782 included household furniture and various fees and commissions paid for services as valuator or administrator of the property of deceased or absentee friends, and as a land surveyor. So, absentee ownership was prevalent in the Caribbean. Some people suspect that that's one of the reasons why they had so many uprisings, because those enslaved people were not under the consistent watch of a lot of white people, like here in the United States. So during this time, it was necessary for there to be one white employee for every 30 slaves. And even in Thistlewood's case, he didn't hire the one white person for every 30 slaves. He would rather pay the tax. And given a ratio of 1 to 30 on a plantation, those enslaved people could often come together and do away with their plantation supervisors, the head white man in charge, right? On the pen, he was still dissatisfied with the performance of his slave driver, who was now strapped. Tuesday, January 22nd, 1782, flagged Nanny and Frankie for abusing Strap in the field, Fanny for her exceeding impudence, and Strap for carrying no authority. On Saturday, February 9th, 1782, last night damsel brought to bed of a boy by Dr. Lowther's old Quashiba. The child died on the 13th, so less than a week in this world. On Friday, February 22nd, 1782, this morning Mr. Dalby, now the Kenyon's overseer at Egypt, rode over. A myth between him and Mr. Kenyon about flogging the Negroes. Mr. Kenyon can't bear to see them flogged. On Friday, March 1st, 1782, flogged Caesar and Joe for lying, letting the cattle and horses get in the gardens and destroy things. So that pissed him off. Greetings, Sister Ra and the elders listening with you. I'm so grateful that you're here. Thanks so much for tuning in. On Saturday, March the 2nd, this morning I flogged Lincoln and Suki for taking Joe's box and harboring him. Suki fell in one of her fits, wrote to Miss Bess Hayward, and Donnie came over and bled her. She was pretty well in the evening. Joe still in the field. When she was in the fit, Lincoln told Jimmy Stewart that if she did not recover, he would cut his own throat. On the next day, Suki was still not well, and Abba had a bad crick in her neck, and Bess had a belly ache. Thistlewood noted, "This unreasonable, damp weather is very unwholesome." But with Bess, it was more than the weather. That night, she miscarried. Early in the same month came news of the death of an old acquaintance, Dr. John Freebarn in St. Elizabeth. He had been the vineyard's doctor in Thistlewood's time. Monday, March 11th, 1782. Martial law proclaimed at Savannah Lamar today. Saturday, March 16th, 1782. The French and the Spaniards are certainly expected about the full moon. Everybody terribly alarmed and carrying their valuables up into the mountains. On Wednesday, March 27th, 1782, intelligence has arrived that the Spaniards are embarking their men to invade this island, and part of the militia is ordered to town. On Friday, March 29th, 1782, gave Frankie a ticket and sent her with Fibber's trunk of most of her most valuable clothes and equipment to Jenny Young, who was Fibber's daughter, in the mountain as a place of greater safety than here. Jenny Young, House Frankie, and others of the Copes slaves from Egypt were now with the Copeses in occupation at Pertheron. Sunday, March 31st, 1782, the Grenadiers, Light Infantry, and Brown Infantry set out for the headquarters this morning in all about 200 fine men. The four companies have 45 men each, and about 20 troopers go. Thursday, April 18th, 1782, Peggy, being remarkably meager, had her searched, and she is found very bad with venereal disease. Now remember, this was the month that he had had sex with Peggy at least once, because in the beginning we talked about his sexual exploits with these women. Sunday, April 28th, 1782, in the morning, Mr. Mitchell come down and breakfasted with me. A report that Admiral Rodney has took 5 and sunk 1 French ship of the line, that the French admiral is among those he has taken, and that the train of artillery intended to be made use of against this island is fallen into his hands, and that he still was in pursuit of them. They were to have a rendezvous off Port Royal on May the 4th. There's a note here that says, In February of 1782, the French fleet under Admiral de Grasse had sailed from Martinique to combine with a Spanish fleet for a joint attack on Jamaica. The French move had, however, been observed by the British Admiral Lord Rodney, who intercepted them and defeated them in the Battle of the Saints, so called because it took place near a group of tiny islands of that name off the coast of Dominica. In recognition of his victory, which saved Jamaica from attack and possible capture, he was welcomed with a wild rejoicing, and the assembly ordered an erection of a statue to his memory in the square at Spanish Town. So, if it exists today, a statue of Admiral Lord Rodney in Spanish Town, Jamaica, then it's because of this battle. In the middle of the afternoon, Pompey's hut up on the hill by the little gate was burnt down, supposed to be set on fire purposely by Peggy, belonging to Canaan Estate, an old wife of his. There was no fire in it, and she has been seen to go out of it, got 5 minutes before, and met my Negroes by Vine's old garden with fire in her pipe. Pompey was at the bay. Friday, May 10th, 1782, Sally is ill of a bad cold. She is said to be breeding. So Sally was having sex with somebody. On Saturday, May 11th, 1782, wrote to Miss Bess Hayward by Sally and sent her to have her collar took off and a little blood took from her. She received a note from Miss Bessie that Sally had miscarried in the path. She sent 4 bits to provide for her. On Sunday, May 12th, 1782, received 4 bits from Myrtilla for the day that Dick bought no fish. Last Wednesday, he had come in the night with only a few drummers and had been well flogged. For 140 plantains, I paid 14 bits. On Wednesday, the 15th, Thistlewood rode into the bay. There, he found Sally very bad and sent for Dr. Bell to come to her. She was bled, and the doctor prescribed 4 grains of James's powders every 2 hours. She returned to the pen on the 23rd, somewhat better. Also, at Savannah Lamar on the 15th, Thistlewood signed the letter from this parish to Admiral Rodney, said to be wrote by Mr. Beckford. He thought it an excellent composition. On the 20th, Burton's Mary ran away, and this was to be a very long absence. Despite continual search and follow-up of rumors, she was not brought back until January of 1784. On Wednesday, May 22nd, 1782, there was a great excitement, and Thistlewood had gone to Savannah Lamar to buy cedar shingles at £5 per 1,000. Rode on into the thick of it at the Bluefields Tavern. The fleet at Bluefields, now 88, sail but continually increasing. The Sandwich, a 90-gun ship there, on board whom is Sir Peter Parker, the Count de Grasse, and others. The Admiral's chaplain ashore buying yams, limes, fowls, sheep, hogs, and other provisions. and the house was full of seafaring people. On Saturday, May 25th, 1782, the fleet sailed this morning from Bluefields at 3 p.m., the main body of them a little to the west of the true south, a very pleasant sight, extending from far southwest to near Bluefields, could see them pretty well out of my new dwelling house. On Sunday, May 26th, 1782, 178 plantains for 14 bits. Early in June, there were other purchases for slaves' use: 2 dozen bills and 2 dozen hoes at 45 shillings a dozen, 6 felling axes at 5 shillings each, and on Sunday, June 16th, 1782, at Hatfield Gate, got 168 plantains for 13 bits, for 2 cabbages a bit. Late in July, there was to be an interesting change in drivership. Strap, driver, had on the 23rd of June been put to watch some beef, and at night the kidneys and fat had gone from both hindquarters. Strap said the dogs had gone with it while he was in bed. Thistlewood said this was false. 3 days later, on Tuesday, June 25th, 1782, flogged Strap for last Saturday night's work and put Jimmy, driver, in his stead. Jimmy remained driver until the 22nd of July, when Joe, Thistlewood's attendant and house slave, had to be treated for crab yaws, and Jimmy, his predecessor in that job, was taken back into service. Put Joe's feet in steep for the crab yaws. Took Jimmy to wait in his room till he come out again, and ordered Phoebe to take the whip. So he made a woman the driver over the gang. And the next day, he left her in charge while he went off on another day's visit to Bluefields. The fleet was in again and captured French ships of the line. Thistlewood and others visited several, including the Ramillies, a very fine 74 gunship, and the La Ville de Paris, which had a most stupendous battery, and on which the master, a sensible man, blind in one eye, says Admiral Rodney might have took as many more French ships if he had known that he was about. On board and ashore, there was much eating and drinking. They sailed on the 25th. On Sunday, July 28th, 1782, for 100 plantains, he paid 12 bits. But prices were soon to become easier for a while as provision grounds were brought back into production. Tuesday, August the 6th, 1782, Fibba gave me £5 sterling, 6 shillings, and 8 dittos in cash. Sunday, August 11th, 1782, between 10 and 11 a.m., Miss Hannah Pinckney hanged herself in her room with 2 handkerchiefs tied together. It is said she drank a great quantity of laudanum yesterday and had not been right some time past. Some say a decanter of rum. So Miss Pinckney, who was a happily married woman in earlier times, committed suicide. Mr. Blake says Jack Cope has lately collared and struck his father, and that Mr. J.C. kicks Mrs. C. out of bed and openly takes girls of 8 or 9 years old. So Mr. Jack Cope kicks out Mrs. Cope and openly has sex with girls as young as 8 or 9 years old. Jenny Young says it's not true, but that Mr. Cope collared and struck Jack. Wednesday, August the 21st, 1782, in the evening when I got home, I found Mr. Francis Scott there. He was at Ackendown. Mr. Wildman discharges everyone. In the first fortnight of September, there was more than the usual incidence of sickness among the slaves. Frankie had a bout of fever. Little Nancy was ill. Sally had the clap, and Bristol, Quashie, and Nellie, Abba's Fibba, and Sam's all had the mumps. Excuse me. And there were to be other ills and outcries during the year. Saturday, September the 28th, 1782, at about 3 o'clock in the morning, was called up, being told that Fanny's Betty was in a fit and speechless, found her bad, but brought her to herself by fresh air and hartshorn. Friday, October the 4th, 1782, Bess still sick, Sally's mouth sore, and last night, Maria going by the hothouse for water. Lynn, who was a dog, bit her leg very bad, so that she could scarcely stand. On Sunday, October 20th, caught Fanny eating dirt. On Sunday, October 27th, 1782, Abba brought to bed about 3 p.m. of a boy. So Abba had another child. Abba was very fertile in this environment. On Sunday, November the 3rd, 1782, before midnight last night, a great outcry at the Negro house. Lincoln, having caught Suki, the retrieved sham boy, in bed with his wife Suki. Thursday, November the 7th, 1782, Lincoln ill of the mumps. On the 19th of November, Fanny was delivered of a girl. Soon after, she became ill on Friday, and on December 6th, she died. Thistlewood had a coffin made, and she was buried on the night of the 7th. A many Negroes and much noise. On Monday, the 9th, Mr. Hayward Sally came to try to suckle Fanny's baby, and Phoebe was put to help her at the Negro house. Surprisingly, the child survived. Thistlewood and Fibba also had suffered during the year. She earlier had been very ill in April. He more or less constantly in complaint, made another specific note in September. Exceedingly unwell. Itch very much. Have boils on my right hip, also very painful, and a swelling in my right groin, painful also. Great heat inwards. So he was itching and burning and had boils. But do you think that stopped him from having sex with these poor enslaved women? No, it did not. But about the same time, he was also able to record with some relief in another direction. Sunday, September 15th, 1782, the most provisions at the bay today that has been since the October hurricane. Good plantains, 15 per bit. Good corn, 20 ditto. Since his friend's death, he had been finding provisions for Mr. Hayward's slaves as well as his own, and it had not been easy. And ill health notwithstanding, he had continued his magisterial duties. On the 23rd of September, at a vestry meeting, he had subscribed to a unanimous resolution. Resolved that the custos shall write to the governor about the insolence of the press gangs lately at Savannah Lamar, in the Savannah, and all the neighborhood. In December, on the 6th, he entertained Mr. John Cope, Mr. Joseph Williams, and Mrs. Williams of Carowena, and Mr. Cruikshanks dined in the new hall the first time. And on the 14th, he was visited by Dr. John, or Jack, Cope, now reconciled with his father, and now with the mulatto company of the militia. More purchases in the month included 25 pounds of saltfish for 13 shillings 9 dittos, 180 yards of Osnabrück at 13 dittos per yard, but he got a discount of 15 shillings, and 104 plantains for 6 bits. A shell blow on the 12th, he served out Osnabrück and thread to his slaves. On Sunday, December 22nd, 1782, Thistlewood writes, "Great news today by Mr. John Chambers from town of Lord Howe's beating the combined fleet." Now keep in mind, this was on the other side of the Atlantic, the British relief on Gibraltar. Among the Penn's slaves, there was little domestic cause for celebration. On Christmas Eve, Dick was flogged for villainy and neglect, and Lincoln was sent out to shoot Buckland to give the Negroes, shot 4 times and missed, so no beef distribution for their Christmas. And Jimmy, now for some time restored to the drivership, was flogged, and on New Year's Eve for letting the Negroes quarrel last night. Like he could tell some grown people what to do. The year 1782 had been a little more rewarding in local sales from the pen, which totaled just over 41 pounds or 1,323 bits. Veal, beef, mutton, and wildfowl had yielded over 1,000 bits, showing quite clearly the effects on the gardens of the 2 hurricanes. But yields from other sources had overcompensated. On January 1st, 1783, Thistlewood's ready money totaled 1,059 pounds, 14 shillings, 9.5 dittos, and an additional 65 pounds, 11 shillings, 10.5 dittos in purse at the bay, presumably the remainder of Mr. Hayward's 200 pounds to feed his Negroes. There were now 34 slaves, 9 men, 12 women, 13 youngsters and babies. In 1782, he had issued 62 tickets in all, which was twice the number of tickets he had issued in the previous year. Thank you very much, Redo 9002. 4-grain Jones powder is either bourbon or gunpowder. I googled it, and she thinks that it's bourbon. Livestock included 5 horses, 29 head of cattle, 98 sheep, which was up from the 83 of the beginning of the year, 35 various poultry, a hog, 2 dogs, and a cat. In the household, the new year began with Fibba very ill with fever and headache, and being visited by her daughter Jenny Young, and by House Frankie, who herself was not bright and had been sent down from Petheron to stay at Salt River for a change of air. Also at the pen and staying there off and on while he looked for another job was Thistlewood's horticultural friend, Francis Scott. On Monday, March 3rd, 1782, Francis Scott engraved upon a piece of copper, "This house founded by Thomas Thistlewood, 1781," and I placed it secure under the south door threshold, where it may lie many years. On Monday, March the 10th, flogged Joe and Pompey for drumming last night, because remember, the drum was illegal. On Saturday, March 15th, in the evening, Mr. James Hornby, carpenter at Savannah Lamar, died. It doesn't say if this was the senior or the junior, but Mr. Hornsby was the master or trainer for his son John, and he had been trying to get his son John trained by Mr. Hornsby before John's untimely death. And now the person that John was apprenticed to has passed away and died. On Tuesday, the 25th, he recorded the particular employments of his slaves as follows: Joe and Bristol, waiting boys; Abba, washerwoman; Bess, seamstress; Damsel, cook and stock girl, assisted by her daughter Nellie; Dick, fisherman; Lincoln, fowler sometimes, him and Jimmy cleaning brass door locks today; Nanny, making mortar; Sally, fetching water for Nanny; Phoebe, carrying stone and mortar; Caesar, sifting lime; Peggy, fetching lime; Salon, picking up the wire grass; Suki, Maria, Myrtilla, picking up horse dung. Both the grass and the horse dung were to be mixed into the mortar; Frankie, selling garden stuff at the bay; Cujo and Pompey were watchmen; Burton's Mary, still run away. The children, unnamed, were presumably employed tending livestock and carrying out other small gang labors. For Dick, the fisherman, it was not a happy day. Dick catched a blue shark about 3 feet long, and it bit his hand terribly. For the next 2 weeks or so, he had to rest, and Lincoln was put to fisherman. Thursday, March 27th, 1783. This day I am 62 years of age. Thursday, May 29th, 1783. Old Sam Millersfield is very ill. Let Nanny go this evening to see him. Sam at Millersfield was Nanny's husband. She remained with him at Millersfield for a couple of days. At the end of June, two other people well known to Thistlewood died. There was John Merrick Williams, who died on the 28th at Retreat Estate, and on the next day, the 29th, Egypt Dido died at Pertheron. July was the infant's turn. On the night of the 10th, Damsel gave birth to a girl who died on the 17th, and on the 21st, Strap hired Strap to himself for 3 bits today to go bury his child at Mrs. Blake's. So he had to pay 3 bits to get time off work to go bury his dead child. On Saturday, August the 16th, 1783, Joe very ill, Don came and bled him and laid on a blister. Fibba also had been ill again, visited by Jenny Young and Jimmy Stewart. Sunday, August the 17th, 1783, about 1 o'clock last night, Mr. H. Roger, come here from Glen Islay and caught Strap in the bed with his wife Sally and tore Strap's frock off of him. On Monday, August the 18th, 1783, Joe was very bad this morning, wrote to Dr. Bell and he come to see him, took a little blood from him and found it good. He is ordered to drink corn water with a dram of nitrate dissolved in each pint, and to take every hour a tablespoonful of water in which 10 grains of emetic tartar is dissolved in each half pint, so as just to make him sickish in hopes it may cause perspiration. The next day, Dr. Bell was back to see Joe, who had not been able to urinate since Sunday. The doctor now put a bogey up his urethra, ordered him glisters and a warm bath, also to take a pill every hour and a half as made follows: 20 grains of James powder and 12 of calomel, made into 6 pills with a little breadcrumb. He took of these about 9 o'clock at night as they worked him well downwards and he made water. His stews are bloody and black matter. He also parted with 4 worms. Greetings, Bwana Hagaziki. Thanks so much for tuning in. We're so glad you're here. On Wednesday, the 20th, with Joe scarcely any better, if at all, and Frankie and Nanny also ill, but far less seriously, Dr. Bell was back. He left and was recalled. At about 7 o'clock in the evening, Joe was so bad that I expected he would die every minute. Wrote to Dr. Bell, received an answer, and gave him some brandy today, with 30 drops of laudanum in it, which was an infinite service to him and made him easier, or so it seemed. For Dr. Bell was called and came in daily, and Joe remained exceedingly weak. At about 10 a.m. on Sunday, August the 24th, Joe died. Thistlewood provided his coffin and a bottle of rum for those at his burial the next day. The misfortunes, though less fatal ones, continued. On the day that Joe was buried, little Fibble was found to have measles. On the 26th, Frankie was stung by a scorpion, or rather, I imagine, a tarantula, on the inside of her right thigh. She was laid up for a few days in great pain. On September the 4th, she was still ill, incapacitated, but now it was her belly. She could neither go in the bush nor make water. Thistlewood treated her as best he could in accordance with Bell's instructions. She recovered. On Monday, September the 13th, 1783, at night, flogged Lincoln about his 3 Mile River estate wife. On Tuesday, November 11th, 1783, Cujo's bowels are come down by neglecting to wear his truss. On Tuesday, November 25th, 1783, Cujo has made up with an old woman named Chloe belonging to Mr. Beckford. On Thursday, December the 11th, 1783, at dinner time, Bess was brought to bed of a boy from Mr. Durant. Durant was a carpenter working on Thistlewood's house. The boy that Bess brought life to died a week later. Now you have to also ask yourself, were these enslaved people killing their own children because death was better than enslavement? Or was it just that they were passing away of natural causes? On Wednesday, December 31st, 1783, Phoebe brought to bed this morning of a girl. Meantime, there had been other noteworthy events. Francis Scott had found a position as overseer at Mount Pleasant. Fibba's ground had been prepared, fenced in, and a gate put up. Mr. Simpson, now Egypt's overseer, had been sent to a sale of slaves in Montego Bay on the first Thursday of December and brought 2 men, privileged Negroes, at 70 pounds and duty, which equals 71 pounds each, and 2 women of the cargo at 64 pounds each, including duty. Note, 63 and duty and 68 and duty were cargo prices for women and men. It had not financially been too bad a year. Local sales had increased to 2,045 bits or 63 pounds, 18 shillings, 1.5 didos, and the garden produce was once again substantial. Veal at 743 bits, French peas at 318 beats, mutton at 254 bits, kidney beans at 234 bits, wildfowl at 191 bits, turnips at 183 bits, and other items at 122 bits. Even with slaughterings and deaths, his flock of sheep now outnumbered 121, but he did not keep his cattle. On October 4th, he had sold his remaining 26 heads at 8 pounds 10 shillings. Give me one moment. On October 4th, he sold the remaining 26 heads at 8 pounds 10 shillings a head to be paid for in bills in July of 1784. So, no beef for the slaves at Christmas. He served them about 2 pounds of saltfish each and the usual rum. and went off himself to dine at Mr. Clement Cook Clark's in the Savannah. An excellent dinner, plenty of claret, he says. On January 1st, 1784, he had £732 sterling, 8 shillings, and 6.5 dittos in ready money, besides crowns and dollars laid up, and his small debts were outmatched by sums due to him. Livestock was now reduced to 4 horses, his sheep, the various poultry, and his dog and cats. So before he had 2 dogs and a cat, now I guess he has 1 dog and multiple cats. In 1783, he had issued only 28 tickets to his slaves. 8 men now, with Joe gone, 12 women, but with one, Burton's Mary, still run away, and 14 children, though one, Abba's Mary, blind, born December 1761, was now listed among the women. The others were Abba's Jenny, born August of 1772, Phoeba, born April of 1776, and Ben, born October of 1782. Phoebe's Charity, born January 1778, Nancy, born April 1781, and Frankie just arrived on December 31st, 1783. Fanny, who had died, had left 2 now living with her husband, Cujo and Betty, born May 1778, and baby Fanny, born November 1782. Bees Bristol, born August 1772, and Sam, born January 1780, and damsels Nellie, born September 1772, Quashi, born April 1775, and Vinnie, born July 1778. So he was going back to see and document when all these people were born. There might have been some potential children in here based on when they were born and when these women were impregnated, but he was definitely trying to increase his enslaved population by having sex with these women and impregnating them. Greetings, KW Don 7. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm so glad you're here. At the beginning of the year and periodically throughout, his slaves and Mr. Hayward's were employed cutting and chipping logwood. In mid-January, hearing that Burton's Mary was in the Lucia Gaol, he sent Mr. Hayward's coffee for her. A few days later, she arrived. On Thursday, January the 22nd, 1784, at about 3 p.m., coffee brought Burton's Mary from out of the Lucia Gaol, for whom paid £2, 18 shillings, and 1.5 ditto. Had a receipt. Also gave coffee 4 bits to bear his expenses. Received a note from Mr. Edwin Lewis, handcuffed Mary, and secured her in the bilboes. On Friday, January the 23rd, 1784, so 2.5 days later, right? Took Mary out of the bilboes and had Sally collar with 2 prongs put on her secure. Marked her on each cheek, so he branded her face. Gave her a new bill and sent her into the field to work. Cujo, right, took her for his wife. Cujo. So that either means that Cujo forced himself upon her sexually, or that she and Cujo lived together in their domestic situation because nobody else wanted her because she was labeled as a runaway. Her face was branded with that upside down triangle and two T's on it. Thistlewood was again himself complaining of his own health. Friday, January the 2nd, 1784, am very unwell. In the morning, rode into the savannah, called at Mr. Chambers and paid the Honorable John Cope £18 for Phoebus hire to the 16th November last. Had his receipt. Last night, had sex with Phoebe. January 4th, 1784, which was a Sunday. My hand shakes so today that I can scarcely write, and it is sometimes seized with such sudden twists of numbness that I am obliged to drop the pen. On Sunday, the 11th, he recorded a local sale of slaves. John Tharp, Esquire of Good Hope Estate in Trelawney. Now remember, John Tharp had purchased Good Hope from Williams of Westmoreland in 1760 for 74,000 pounds. It was a large property, 17 acres, 3,000 acres, and John Tharp was at the time rapidly extending the family's wealth and landed property. So this was a money grab for him. He was looking to obtain a bunch of assets. John Tharp has brought 430 Negroes from a gentleman in Carpenter's Mountain at £50 per head. All of them Creoles, many of them children, invalids, and some fine Negroes to pay in 10 years by 10 annual bonds, no sores on any of them. A week later, the Earl of Effingham arrived at Savannah Lamar, bringing his usual crates and boxes of clothing, books, foodstuffs, and trees. He spent the next weeks bringing in and unpacking goods. Give me one moment. All right, we're going to go back a little bit. He spent the next weeks bringing in and unpacking his goods, planting English trees, watching another comet in late January and early February, and looking for Burton's Mary, who had run off again. On Monday, February 9th, 1784, brought to Mr. John Thompson 2 barrels of flour at 40 shillings per barrel, and a keg of brandy for 40 shillings. That evening, received by Mr. Robinson's cart my 2 barrels of porter, barrel containing 4 hams and 8 smoked tongues, and 2 barrels of flour. They only brought them to Mr. Wilson's little garden in the valley, as the cattle would not draw up the hill. Gave the cartman and his boy 4 bits. Rolled them home afterwards. On Tuesday, February the 10th, 1784, flogged Dick and made him pay me 3 bits for bringing such bad fish. Remember, Dick had been the driver and was now in the humiliated position of being the fish catcher, right? And in being the one that caught the fish, he, anytime he did not bring satisfactory fish to Thistlewood, Thistlewood punished him severely. The same way he did Chubb, the same way he did Strap, the same way he did Lincoln and Jimmy. Anybody that was the fisherman was in a bad way. Greetings, Anthony McPhail. I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for tuning in. And Dick was to be flogged twice more in the month for the same reason, and Pompey once for letting Mr. Wilson's livestock stray into Thistlewood's gardens. Mr. Wilson's pastures, he noted, were in very poor condition. On Monday, the 23rd, Burton's Mary went off again. News was had that she was somewhere about the Bachelor's Hall estate near Lucia. Coffee was sent in search, and a letter with her description dispatched to the overseer there. Eventually, on the 27th of March, she was brought in and put in irons until the 6th of April, when she was released and sent into the field under charge. In March, Thistlewood was again complaining, this time of his rheumatic pains in his right wrist and left hip, can scarcely walk, and perhaps it was his continuing ill health that led him to a previously unrecorded since his arrival in Jamaica activity. Rode on Sunday, the road in the morning to the bay, served Mr. Hayward's Negroes, attended divine service in the courthouse. Mr. Stanford preached a very good sermon. Text, second chapter of Job, 10th verse. A good congregation of at least 150 of all colors. The next day, he recorded another, more practiced occupation, though, in a sense, it too was a first time for him. Come, Abba's Mary, while she was on her period, in the bedroom, on the floor, gave her 4 bits in dittos. Mary was, at the time, 6 months pregnant. In June, she bore a daughter for 3 Mile River Kwaku, but the baby died when only a week old. Monday, April 9th, 1784, let Strap, at Thibba's request, go to Pertherton, to acquaint young Jenny of her husband Jimmy Stewart's being dangerously ill. Jimmy Stewart recovered, but later in the month another acquaintance died, the carpenter Cumberland. In May of 1784 was dry and provisions scarce. On the 24th, Solon was sent into the country to look for provisions. Sally was sent to the bay with grass to sell on the 2nd. She failed to return. 2 days later, Pompey's hut caught fire. He left fire in it carelessly, and he was, at month's end, again flogged for letting cattle, this time from Kirkpatrick, stray in the gardens. During the month, Lincoln, Abba's Ben, Damsel Maria, and Bess's Sam all suffered ailments, and Thistlewood himself perceived the signs of another venereal infection. In early June, Abba was temporarily very ill. So too was Fibba, who had violent looseness, sickness at the stomach, and on the night of the 7th, no, and other symptoms on the night of the 7th. On Friday, June 25th, 1784, a Spaniard in at the bay took down Mary Burton's, but they would not buy her, say they are going to town and want to buy 1,000 new Negroes for the King of Spain. It is said they have got a prodigious quantity of dollars on board. Only one of them speaks English. On Monday, May 28th, June 28th, 1784, Nanny at home ill, flogged her for standing in the rain on Sunday. So Nanny came home sick, right? But he beat her while she was sick because that Saturday she was standing in the rain, and that's why she came home sick that Monday. The next day, the weather went from one extreme to the other. Flood rains down drowned his gardens. On Saturday, July 3rd, 1784, in the evening, Mr. Wilson, his elder brother, the surveyor, and Sir James Richardson come over and eat some bread and cheese and stayed till about 11 o'clock. Sir James is a sensible man. Mr. John Richardson is a younger brother of his who wrote the noted dictionary English, Arabic, and Persian. He says out of 190 Negroes he has bought in 14 years, he has lost 141 of them. Such bad luck he has. He allows that prudence and industry are highly necessary, but thinks that most succeed from a lucky combination of circumstances. But Sir James clearly was not disheartened. In November, he would buy Paradise Estate and its provision mountains for £5,000. Meanwhile, on July 6th, Egypt again changed hands. It was sold to Thomas Hill for £2,800. The slaves, about 100, were bought by Hill and three others for a total of £5,000. The livestock to two others for £950 at an average of about 15 a head. Even the furniture was sold at auction a few days later. Sally, who had returned from her absence in the bay, went away again. Monday, July 26, 1784, Thistlewood writes, Sally wanting. It seems that Mr. Robertson's George's wife, in other words, the slave wife of a slave at Kirkpatrick, sent her out yesterday with bread and other provisions to sell. On Saturday, July 31st, 1784, Sally brought home, caught in the Deans Valley Plantain Walk by one of the Paradise men, had her flogged. In the last days of July and the 1st of August, the rains came again with strong winds which drove boats ashore, flattened plantain trees, and damaged other trees, crops, and buildings. The heavy weather caused anxiety, if not alarm. It caused damage to Nanny, who was running into the storm house, fell and hurt her hip so badly that she was laid up for weeks after. It was kinder to Sally, helping the night to give her cover. On Monday, August 2nd, 1784, yesterday evening, Frankie, having picked peas in my new garden for market today, in the night, Sally stole the peas and basket also and is gone. Solon, as usual, went out in search but did not find her. On the following Sunday, she was brought home. A maroon who said his name was Jonas Williams had captured her on the barracks road. Thistlewood paid him £1 3 shillings and put a chain around Sally's neck and locked her to Mary's Burton's chains. So harnessed, they were made to work in the days. On Wednesday, August the 4th, 1784, this forenoon, damsel brought to bed of a boy, but he died on the 11th. Abba, now the mother of 4 living and several who had not survived, and soon become a grandmother, had acted grand, and subsequently was called upon to act in the capacity on the pen and neighboring estates. At mid-month, Nanny was still laid up. Strap's feet were in steep for yaws. Peggy was ill of the foul disease, which means Peggy had VD. Maria had a severe toothache, and Bess had a fever. On Saturday, August the 4th, 1784, lent Jimmy Stewart, Strap's horse, to Petherton, returned on Monday morning. On the 29th, Thistlewood, with much relief, recorded that he had at least succeeded in selling Mr. Hayward's slave, 52 of them and 1 young child, to Julene's Herring, Esquire, for £5,200, to be paid off in 3 years, with security given on Paul Island estate. The people were to be delivered at Paul Island on October 1st. At first, some of them declare they will not go and are quite refractory, but by the end of August, they were said to be now reconciled to going. Thistlewood gave no suggestion that any threats had been used. Yeah, right. On Sunday, September the 5th, 1784, Captain Arthur is arrived from Philadelphia, came in yesterday. He asked £5 per barrel for his flour. On Thursday, September the 16th, 1784, yesterday and today, perceive like hairs floating in the air before my eyes, sometimes like larger watery bodies, which commonly seem to descend. Am greatly alarmed by this. They are inflamed somewhat. Jimmy has got a sore foot, made him lie up. He has also got some ugly red spots about him. Suspect he is going to be distempered. But Jimmy nevertheless sent early in October on Strap's horse to Mr. Rogers to buy provisions. Thistlewood gave him 4 bits for expenses on the journey. So it's interesting how he continues to send his slaves up and down the road, right, to go buy provisions, and they have money. Some of them are branded, but some of them are not. But there was a great deal of trust in these slave owners that these enslaved people would return to the plantation. And I guess this is probably especially true on the island because the Maroons were not on their side, right? Because the Maroons had come into treaty with the British to return any runaways. And there was no guarantee that you would be able to find a passage on a ship because maybe it was illegal to buy tickets or to sell tickets to enslaved people. They had to be purchased by their white sponsor. They had to have the correct paperwork and documentation in order to buy tickets to buy passage onto a ship. On Monday, October the 4th, 1784, Jimmy lies up lame yet. On Tuesday, October the 12th, 1784, in the morning, had damsel flogged for not keeping the cookroom clean. During that month, Lincoln was exceedingly active and successful in his forays into the morass shooting wild fowl, but also in that month, roaming cattle had ruined Fibber's ground, fence and gate notwithstanding, and had then turned their attention to the Negro ground. Jimmy had twice fired upon them without effect. On Friday, November the 5th, 1784, had Mary and Sally carried to the bay by strap, but McNish only bid 50 for both, so sent them back. So he was trying to sell Mary and Sally, the ones he had given venereal diseases to. Excuse me. Tuesday, October the 9th, 1784. In the morning, Lincoln shot Taurus near Fibber's ground, which was destroyed, shared among the Negroes. On Tuesday, the 11th, perhaps feeling that if cattle were to ruin his gardens, they might as well be his, Thistlewood brought 4 cows, a calf, and a heifer from Mrs. Eleanor James, Mr. Leighton Smith's housekeeper at Chantilly, for 36 pounds, which is a lot of money. On Sunday, he returned to church. After service, he, Mr. Stanford the clergyman, and others dined. According to Mr. Stanford, to fright a dog, open your arms and seem earnest to catch him, and he will almost surely run away, however fierce. And if a mad bull, ox, or cow make at you, ever so furiously, turn your back and stoop with your head down between your legs, your face towards them. They will instantly make away. So they were telling them how to fend off wild animals and cattle. Mr. Thistlewood, who was more widely experienced in such matters, commented, these were dangerous experiments. On Sunday, November the 21st, 1784, Mr. Lewis Robertson, Mr. James Robertson, Mr. Charles Lewis Robertson, Dr. Robert Rucastle, Mr. John Thompson, Mr. Hugh Wilson, and his cousin the Cooper dined with me, had soup, boiled mutton, a leg of boiled mutton and caper sauce, fish, roast mutton, savoys, boiled crab, baked rice pudding, 2 roast ducks and teal, cheese, shaddock, sweet limes, forbidden fruit punch, grog, brandy, Madeira wine, and porter. Whenever they had these big meals, he was very proud to talk about them. On Monday, November the 29th, 1784, this morning rode to the bay, signed a petition to the King's most excellent Majesty, another to the Honorable House of Commons of Great Britain in Parliament, assembled, praying that some of the duty may be took off from our produce and that we may have supplies from America again. So remember, America was no longer a British colony, so they weren't allowed to trade with America anymore. So he was petitioning the King's Court to have these duties taken off of their produce from America and to have them open up the trade with America again so that they could trade freely with them again, because Prior to the War of Independence, they were able to trade with America quite freely. Tuesday, November 30th, 1784. This morning, Mr. Thomas Hill and Mr. Ralph Hilton called, and I sold Mr. Hilton Burton's Mary and Sally for £40, £40 apiece, and immediately sent them down to Mr. Lyon's store by Strap, who delivered them on board the vessel. Had Phoebe flogged for refusing to look after the cattle and impudent speeches. At the beginning of December, the slaves were employed in building a new cattle pen, a new sheep pen, an arbor for the granadilla vine, and other sheds and props. On the 4th, Phoebe's granddaughter, who was named Mulatto Nancy, paid a visit, and Thistlewood gave her $1 against Christmas. So was he messing around with her, or did he have some grandfatherly affection toward her? Because while he was not Jenny's father, was he perhaps this child's father? Because if the child was a mulatto and Jenny was black, Jenny Young was black, and Jimmy, her husband, was black, who was this child's father? On Monday, December 13th, 1784, Damsel's vine is full of little spots. Suspect is the yaws. Cacaw, as the Negroes call it. On the 23rd, he paid Mr. George Woodbine in Savannah Lamar £31 sterling, 2 shillings, and 6 dittos for weighing and wharfing of 83 tons of logwood. The price in England would be £9 or £10 sterling per ton. The prime local price was about £5 sterling per ton. On Christmas Day, he served out beef and rum to the slaves, gifts to friends, and dined at home with Mr. Wilson and others. On Thursday, January the 4th, 1785, noticed Strap in the cookroom with Fibber early in the morning. The possible twinge of jealousy, perhaps, reflected his awareness of his own declining sexual activity. Not that he was inactive. In 1784, he had taken Fibber 34 times and Bess 33 times, and Bess 14 times, and there had been 21 other occasions with 11 others, of whom all but one belonging to Mr. Wilson were his own. But that was a far cry from the days when in a year, handicapped by long ill health, he proudly recorded 87 times with Fibber alone. In early January, the ships came in, and he unloaded his boxes, books, clothing, barrels of porter, of which he sold at £3 5 shillings each, foodstuffs, plants, and other provisions. He gave Jenny Young a present, a silk handkerchief, which is what he used to give to his own enslaved women that he was having sex with. So it's interesting that he noted that he gave her a silk handkerchief. Dick, the fisherman, was frequently in trouble. Early in March, he was flogged and chained to 3 56-pound weights for having brought little to no fish. 2 days later, he was set free and sent back to fish. The next day, the 7th, Thistlewood noted perhaps with some chagrin. My house Negroes now get great quantities of stone basses, tarpons, some snooks, and fine mudfish in the morass southwest of the large caves. Some of also some sorts of sea fish. In mid and late March, Thistlewood complained less and entertained more, and involved himself in supervising the planting of seeds, seedlings, and saplings, oranges, shaddocks, and forbidden fruit, as well as other things. On Monday, July 4th, 1785, gave Suki today as she had been confined attending Lincoln, who had been ill since June 24th. Sunday, July 17th, 1785, rode to Cabarita Bridge early this morning, but no corn come. Plantains seemed plenty, but sold only 15 for a bit. Saturday, July 23rd, 1785, last night, Blind Mary brought to bed a girl by Abba. So Abba was the midwife who helped Blind Mary give birth. 3 Mile Quaco is her husband. On Sunday, on Wednesday, July 27th, 1785, Salon has got the clap, gave him a mercurial pill. Again, on August 1st, another spell of very heavy weather, almost a hurricane, damaged his newly planted trees and gardens. The reverses were now frequent, but he gave no indication of despair. On Tuesday, August 2nd, 1785, Dick brought a snook weighing upwards of 13 pounds. A few days later, Mr. Wilson's fisherman, George, doubled the standard by bringing in one weighing 25 pounds. Friday, August 12th, 1785, a flood today. Saturday, August 13th, 1785, in the evening, went to see Senor Cortez and perform in Mr. McIntosh's yard. He performed on the tightrope very well, as did also his buffoon, 2 girls, and a little boy. Also on the slack wire, danced, tumbled, and did other tricks. Paid $1 entrance. Mr. Nicholas A. Blake, Mr. John Stewart, Mr. Cruikshank, Mr. John Thompson, Mr. Cameron, and others there. Also many mulattoes and others. Negroes pay $50. Imagine they would receive between 15 pounds and 20 pounds sterling. Got home before 10 o'clock at night. On Thursday, the 18th, in the morning, both Lincoln and Nancy were missing. Lincoln arrived at about 9 a.m. from Retreat Estate. Nancy came in the evening. She had been away looking after her husband, old Sam, who was very bad. Thistlewood received 3 bits for her per day. In the second half of the month, the rains set in again and continued into September. The logwood cutting and chipping slowed down and stopped altogether later in the month. On Sunday, September 18th, 1785, to Frankie for a hogshead 6 bits. Her hog came to 60 bits at 10 dittos per pound. On Thursday, September the 22nd, 1785, disturbed last night and the night before, and indeed almost every night by Negro plays at Egypt. So he was pissed because whether they were having fun, doing plays, or doing housewarmings, he was upset that they were disturbing his rest. Perhaps because of the unsettled weather, September had been an unhealthy month for Thibba and Thistlewood, and at the beginning of October, he was once again complaining of his stomach, his kidneys, and his general discomfiture. He began wearing a flannel waistcoat under his shirt to see if it would help, and on the 7th, he sent to Dr. Drummond for medicines. The next day, the doctor visited. On the 13th, Maria was laid up with a headache, and the doctor came back. On Friday, October the 14th, 1785, at night, come Thibba very poorly. On Saturday, October the 15th, 1785, Maria still lays up with Nanny, and Nanny gone home with old Sam. On Saturday, October the 22nd, 1785, at night, come Thibba badly. But the garden work went on. He planted broccoli, savoys, cabbages, cauliflower, lettuces, and other crops. So did the heavy weather. Tuesday, the 25th of October, 1785, these frequent storms will entirely ruin this island. Once more, the corn was beaten down, all the European trees bent and broken. On the 27th, he entertained guests at dinner, but he was unwell. The weather was still bad. Provisions were scarce, and Lincoln should have shot 3 times as many as he did. The judgment seems a little harsh, but with 72 loads of shot, he had brought down 87 birds. Friday, October 28th, 1785, at night, come Thibba. In early November, there was another planting: lettuce, turnips, melangina, endives, broccoli, parsley, sage. Lincoln, Abba, Nanny, and Thistlewood himself all suffered from some ailment or another. And it was time for the children to be inoculated against smallpox. So that was more money out of his pocket. Dr. Drummond was attending to Mr. Wilson's people, and Thistlewood took, excuse me, and Thistlewood took Sam, Nancy, Frankie, Ben, Fanny, Prue, and Jenny Young's Jimmy to be done. The usual pre and post inoculation treatment was given. At the end of the month, they all seemed to be well, except Jenny Young's little Jimmy. His father visited, and Thistlewood lent him a horse to ride back to the new or the old Hope estate. On Wednesday, December 6, 1785, Dick has let his machete fall upon his foot and cut it, suspect willfully, had him flogged and chained to a 56-pound, gave him a dose of jalap, put Lincoln to fish for the present. So Dick, who had been the fisherman, I guess had been sent out to work the field again. And during this time, he let the machete fall on his foot, and it cut him really bad. And this is how Thistlewood's mind works. He felt that Dick had done this thing on purpose, almost cutting off his own foot. And so for that inconvenience, he beat him, right? And after he beat him, he had him put in chains. gave the smallpox inoculated Negro's physique. On Monday the 12th, damsel went to Miss Mary Pinckney's Savannah to have a baby. Miss Pinckney operated what was then one of the more popular taverns in Savannah Lamar, the Free and Easy. On the 13th, damsel gave birth to a girl. 2 days later, Jenny Young's Jimmy has cold sweats, a purging, and some ugly symptoms. Wrote to Dr. Smith by way of Frankie and received an answer. On the 17th, Jenny Young come and the doctor returned. Bess was put to tend the boy. He survived the Christmas, but on January 5th, he died. Right? So Jenny's male son, who was probably by her actual husband, died. On January 1st, 1786, Thistlewood's slave force was back to 34. Sally and Burton's Mary had been sold, but Blind Mary's Prue and Damsel's Juno had arrived. His ready money was down to 136 pounds and a few pieces laid by, but he was owed over 200 pounds, and his only debts were his doctor bills and 18 pounds to Mr. Cope for Fibber. He now had 9 head of cattle, 136 sheep, and his various poultry. The local sales from the pen had brought in 1,964 bits, or 61 pounds, 7 shillings, and 6 dittos. Despite the bad weather, sales of garden produce had brought in 28 pounds, 10 shillings of that total, and mutton, grass, and all remaining items together had each brought in about 11 pounds. On the 29th of December, the shipping had arrived with Thistlewood's packages. He was able to open 1786 with sartorial style. Sunday, January 1st, 1786, began to wear new silk purse and black hat every day. New long walking stick. Gave Jimmy my old hat. For the first half of the year, indeed, he seemed to be in comparatively good health and very active on the pen, though obviously war and successive natural disasters had brought severe losses to many and tiredness to him. On Thursday, January the 5th, 1786, in the morning received a note from Mr. Rose by a Negro with a box of plants, gave him 2 bits, wrote to Mr. Rose, and sent Suki, Frankie, and Maria for the remaining ones. Plants received: breadfruit, mango, camphor, Madeira peach or clingstone of America, lychee, and Persian plum, and a variety of cotton and flower seeds. He planted them out the next day. On the 5th, little Jimmy Stewart was buried, attended by his parents, his grandmother Crumba, Free, Daphne, Mr. Hayward's Betty, and others. I noticed that Fibber, right, who was also his grandmother, was noticeably missing from being in attendance at this funeral. On Friday, January the 7th, 1786, the mango tree planted yesterday is 15 inches tall, the lychee 11, the Madeira peach 6.5, and the breadfruit 18 inches and has but 4 leaves. On Monday, January the 9th, 1786, that evening received a note from Miss Mary Pinckney, wrote an answer, and sent her some pawpaws. Received for a turkey cock from her 26 bits. Had mulatto Jimmy Stewart reprimanded for idling his time away, so much so here. Fibber not pleased at all, but it was necessary. And he wants to make this his home and takes a great deal of waiting on and attendance. On Thursday, January the 17th, 1786, Mr. Joseph Williams died at Petherton today at 4 p.m., aged 35 years. On Sunday, he went to church. There were between 30 and 40 people there, above half free Negroes and mulattoes. On Monday, January 23rd, 1786, the morango trees in my garden in full flower, very handsome. The next day, he sent some fish to Miss Pinckney. He was a fairly regular supplier of foodstuffs and of grass to her inn. On Wednesday, February the 1st, he brought up from the bay the case of trees bought by Monsignors Clark and Blake from North America, and on the 2nd he planted them, although the weather on the pen was excessively dry. On Wednesday, February 15th, 1786, received a puncheon of Norward corn by Andrew Black's canoe, said to contain 13 bushels at 10 bits per bushel and 20 shillings the cask, which was only wood hoops. The corn just fills my chest, which holds 12 and a half bushels. But there were supposed to be 13 bushels in there. Excuse me. Our Lieutenant Governor, Brigadier General Alured Clark, dined this day with Mr. George Scott, last Saturday with Mr. Cope at Petherton, on Friday with Blake and Clark, Saturday at the Free and Easy, Mary Pinckney's, Sunday with Mr. Murray, Monday in the courthouse dinner by subscription, Tuesday with Mr. John Lewis, and today with Mr. John Campbell at the New Hope. Tomorrow, it is said, with Mr. Hilton. Tuesday, February 28th, 1786, brought of Captain Jimmy Foote 4 barrels of superfine English flour, 280 pounds each, at 3 pounds 5 shillings each, and he is to send them. At the beginning of March, Peggy's hand was badly injured and she was incapacitated for over 4 months with, at the start, frequent attendance by the doctor. Among the others, there had been the continued and continued to be the usual round of complaints: lameness, bellyache, headache, and fever. On March 11th, which was a Saturday, 1786, Jimmy Young came today and brought a fine calf head and wild hog, dried and smoked, also some balm. Gave her a keg of biscuit, note, made 27 bits of the other 5, which is within 1 bit of what they cost. He had bought 7 kegs of Vindou at the end of February at 4 bits per keg, and had given 1 keg to Mr. Hayward's Mary, who was, he said, having a hard time of it. Mid-month, he kept Strap with him in the garden, assisting me to trim the fruit trees. Phoebe was also there, weeding, and he assailed her on the 20th and again on the 23rd by the Granadilla Arbor. So he was having sex with Phoebe, right? On Tuesday, the 9th of May, 1786, bought of Captain Robinson one of the Norwood horses lately seized by Mr. Sweeney for £25. The horse was 6 or 7 years old and 13.5 or 4.5 feet high. Late April and early May brought another period of drought, which lasted until the beginning of June, when it was broken by flood rains. This was the most unseasonal weather for May, which was a month in which rain was normally expected. Trees and plants again dried up. Provisions became scarce, and most of the exotics in my garden are dead or dying. On Friday, May the 12th, 1786, at 1 p.m., rode to Mr. Davis's at Stone's great house in the Savannah, gave, in other words, offered, and his offer was apparently accepted, £1,800 for the house and 35 acres of land surrounding it, payable in 6 years, equal payments. Mr. Davis calls it Stonehenge. At dinner, Mrs. Davis, Mr. Davis, Mr. Cruikshank, Mr. Clark, Captain Duthie, and myself. On Wednesday, June 28, 1786, Barrel of Flour Done opened the 13th installment, received 104 bits, made of it £12, 12 shillings, 6 dittos, which is equal to 404 bits. Made of the 4 barrels, which is only 7 shillings, 6 dittos less than they cost, for which have used for flour since March 2nd. At the end of June, the 3 Mile River slaves were advertised for sale at Craig's Tavern. Captain Duthie brought 2 families, 18 in number. I think in the following week, Thistlewood attended the sale, thinking to buy Kwaku, Mary's husband, but he was not put up. Scarce any bidders, so the Negroes ordered home. On Saturday, July 8th, 1786, gave my Negroes today to seek provisions, which are the scarcest ever known. He was now frequently giving them money to buy food. On Sunday, July 16th, 1786, the estates are likely to change masters in the parish are Egypt and Paradise already have, Shaft's Den, Bluefields, Paradise again, Salt River, Smithfield Pen, 3 Mile River, Camp Savannah, Mountain Spring, Ridgeland, Midgem, Albany, Canaan, Retreat, Old Hope, New Hope, Williams Moorhead, Moreland, Jones's Moreland, Springfield, Mint, Lincoln, Petersfield, Mount Pleasant, Deans Valley Dry Works, Deans Valley Waterworks, and perhaps others. So what he's saying is that a lot of the planters that were there in the previous years were trying to scatter and get away from their investments in the plantation economy in 1786 because he expected all of those different plantations to change ownership during that time. Whether or not he was exaggerating is clear that the estates were in difficulty. So too, but not obviously for either financial or labor problems, was he, but he still kept on planting on the pen. On Wednesday, July 19th, 1786, received a note from William Hilton Esquire with the following seeds from North America. The list included beet, spinach, onion, squash, lettuce, saffron, parsnip, carrot, turnip, cantaloupe, cabbage, Moldavian balm, sage, rue, summer savory, sweet basil, celery, radish, mustard, and about 30 sorts of flowers. So he continuously received all of these different seeds from North America. So perhaps the king lifted some of the duties and opened up some of their trade opportunities with North America, right? On Thursday, July 20th, 1786, Abba's Mary complains of hunger much, gave Abba $1 to assist them. I never saw such a scarce time before. That is certain. Nothing to be had for money. On Friday, July 21st, 1786, Suki, formerly Mr. Lewis Robertson's housekeeper, come over to see Fibba. She brought me a little indigo, gave her kidney beans to plant. Monday, July 31st, 1786, Abba is sick. She is starving. Gave her $1. Wednesday, August 2nd, 1786, great corn is now sold a bit a quart or a wine quart, flour and rice a bit a pint, plant 4 plantains for a bit, 6 or 7 corn a ditto, butter by the firkin 3 bits per pound, fine flour 5 pounds per barrel, beef 6 pounds, and pork 7 pounds per barrel at Savannah Lamar. And on that day the rains came. A little after noon there was a bolt of lightning that destroyed trees on the pen, a frightening clap of thunder, and a deluge. On Wednesday, August 9th, 1786, 2 bunches of plantains and some cassava gone out of the old garden, as supposed by Strap on Monday night, being his watch. On Thursday, August 17th, 1786, dined at Mr. Davis's Stonehenge, and in the evening rode home. On Sunday, August 20th, 1786, my seamstress Bess brought to bed of a boy about 1 p.m. by Abba, died on August the 29th. On Tuesday, August the 22nd, 1786, about 10 p.m., William Beckford Esquire and Mr. James Hay came, dined with me, and stayed till evening. Mr. Beckford is very affable and free. Says he thinks the views from my house exceed any in Cook's Voyages, which both he and Thistlewood had read. Mr. Hay returned Brown's Vulgar Errors and lent him Byron's Narrative, and lent Mr. Beckford's Swinburne's Travels in 8 volumes. At dinner, stewed and fried mudfish, stewed crabs and boiled crabs, a plate of shrimps, a leg of boiled mutton and caper sauce, turnips, broccoli, asparagus, a roast whistling duck, a semolina pudding, cheese, watermelon, pine, shaddock, punch, gin, brandy, Madeira wine, porter, and Taunton ale. On Thursday, August the 24th, 1786, had Myrtilla flogged for impudence when she purposely threw herself into a fit and was in it for 2 hours. So he felt like she had deliberately went into a fit. But guess what she did the next day? On Friday, August the 25th, 1786, Myrtilus still lays up. On Sunday, August the 27th, 1786, today my Negroes bought 15 tolerable corn for a bit. During that week, Thistlewood and his neighbor Hugh Wilson went out. They rode to Paul Island Estate to visit Julene's herring and walk through his garden. They spent the night there. Then on to Mr. and Mrs. Anderson at Belle Isle. Visited Mr. Anderson's garden and pen, then rode home by From Estate. On September the 1st, Thistlewood sowed his North American seeds. He had begun the year actively enough, and he now continued planting, visiting, reading, and exchanging books, corresponding with his brother and Mr. Hewitt, performing his magisterial duties, sitting on a committee planning the new Gaul to be built in Savannah Lamar, and of course, maintaining his journals. But once more, he had begun regularly to complain of ill health with pains all over and his stomach inflamed and puffed up. Tuesday, September 12th, 1786, at night, I had sex with Fibba. It was to be his last time with her or anyone else that he documented. Monday, September 18th, 1786, bought of Captain Arthur a barrel of superfine flour at £4 10 shillings. Bought of Mr. William Moore a barrel of mess beef at £6. He opened both and began to use them. On the 25th, he killed a wheater sheep with a sore belly for the children. He was good meat. On the 26th, he received a package sent to him from William John Glenville, Esquire, a barrister at law in Kingston, with 2 mango seeds, which he planted. On October 3rd, he sent a morango and other seeds to Mr. Glenville. Meanwhile, on the pen, in addition to the usual gardening, some of his slaves were helping Joe Durant, the hired carpenter, to reshingle the staples, repair the storm house, and carry out other building maintenance. In October, he was very weak, aching all over and taking medicines sent to him by Dr. Drummond. But for the first 3 weeks, he still moved around. Friday, October 6th, 1786, Lincoln shot 3 times this morning at large flocks and brought only a pair of teal. He is a great villain without a doubt. On Friday, October the 20th, 1786, no work could be done, very ill, often fit to faint as I walked about. And again, a violent storm. Tore off the piazza roof and some shingles from the body of the house. So the rain beat in Vide weather diary. At night, took a specific pill. What he's saying is that he documented the rain more in depthly in his weather diaries. Saturday, October 21st, 1786, must defer giving account of the damage done till I have better health and can look about me. Used the warm bath in the evening and took a specific pill. Sunday, October 22nd, 1786, a great deal of damage done in the country, it seems, among the buildings. Monday, October 23rd, 1786. Last night, Phoebe brought to bed of a girl, put Suki to attend her, gave her 4 bits to buy candles. The baby died on the 29th. Following the storm on the 20th, there were more flood rains. Solange's house was damaged, and as the young corn I took so much pains with is all destroyed, made them plant it all over again in Negro fashion. This Negro fashion is probably in reference to a method he had been shown by the vineyard slaves in 1751, where you plant the corn 9 inches from corner to corner in squares, 5 rows, in rows, 5 feet apart and 3 feet in the step. So you plant it in a 9 inch square, 5 feet apart, and 3 feet in the step. He was now clearly very ill, and friends and neighbors were coming in to see him. On the 27th and 28th, he was in so much pain that he could not describe his condition, could scarcely notice his visitors, and cannot enumerate what I take or how I rest. His handwriting had become very weak and his journal entries very sketchy. On Tuesday, October the 31st, 1786, am quite confused, don't know how things go on. On Wednesday, November 1st, 1786, putting up a house for Abba's family. But this seems not to have been completed, for in December, January, she, her children, and her granddaughter were housed with Lincoln and Suki. After 6 in the evening, bathed in the warm bath, then was rubbed and took laudanum and hartshorn. Surprising reveries in the night, not to be described, but have had worse nights than this. Thursday, November 2nd, 1786, Negroes putting up Maria's house. And now he rallied. His handwriting became stronger, his language clearer, and he complained less of acute pain. Dr. Bell visited him almost daily. On Monday, November the 6th, 1786, Negroes about Nanny's house, Pompey and Cujo, watchmen, Dick fishing, Phoebe and Jimmy lie up. Lincoln shot 4 squab whistling ducks, sent Mr. Wilson 2 of them. Cannot describe how I am, yet think and feel stronger. Wrote to Dr. Bell by Bristol, received a purge, which took and operated poorly. Did not bath at night, a terrible night. And he relapsed. Through the next week, attended by Dr. Bell and visited by Mr. Wilson and others, he worsened. The final entry in his diary was for Friday, November the 14th. His Negroes were employed as before. Negroes, Lincoln shot 9 till, sent Mr. Wilson a pair, sold 2 pair, then for them received 6 bits, equal 1,785 bits. On the 25th, he made his last will and testament. On the 30th, he died. Thomas Thistlewood, Esquire, was buried in the Church of England churchyard in Savannah, Lamar, on December 1st, 1786. Now we're going to read this appendix and aftermath just so that you know a little bit more about what happened. It's only 2 pages long. Aftermath. Mr. Thistlewood's last will and testament was made on November 25th, 1786, and proved on the January 31st, 1787. His executors were Thomas Anderson Esquire and Charles Payne Merchant. He bequeathed to William Henry Hewitt of Brompton near Kingston, London, by way of remembrance, £50 sterling, and to Francis Scott, lately of this parish, planter, £50 sterling. And I order and direct my executors hereafter named to do as soon as is convenient, may be after my decease, purchase the freedom of a certain Negro woman slave named Thibba, the property of the Honorable John Cope, who has been living with me a considerable time past, provided nevertheless that no more is required for such freedom than the sum of £80 current money of Jamaica. So he had been with her all that time, right? But he was willing only to pay £80 sterling for her at most. And actually, it's a little less than that because current Jamaica money might have been valued a little differently than regular money. So he was willing to pay that £80 for her. In the event of such manumission being procured, but not otherwise, I give devise and bequeath unto said Thibba my Negro woman slave named Bess, and her child named Sam, together with the future issue and increase of said Bess, to hold the said slave named Bess, and her child Sam together with her future issue and increase unto the use of said Thibba, her heirs and assigns forever. So what he was saying is that Bess, although Bess was given to Thibba, but as a slave, she couldn't hold Bess as her property in this instance because there are some instances of enslaved people in the Caribbean making enough money to have their own slave. But in this instance, Thibba could not hold Bess as her own property. So Thistlewood held Bess as his property, and all of the customary treatments that he gave to his enslaved female population, he gave to Bess, right? And he was saying that now that if you can buy Thibba's freedom from Mr. John Cope, then give to Thibba Bess and her son named Sam and all of their future issue to Thibba and her future issue if she's to have any. Also provided the manumission was secured. Now remember, as again I said, it will be recalled Bess had been a gift from Mrs. Bennet to Thibba and Mulatto John. As a slave at that time, Thibba could not lawfully own a slave, and Bess was therefore always given in as one of Thistlewood's slaves. There is no indication why Bristol, who was also Bess's son, aged 14 in 1786, was not also left to Thibba. I order and direct that my executors do lay out the sum of £100 current money aforesaid to the purchase of a lot or piece of land for the said Thibba wherever she shall choose, and that they do build thereon a dwelling house for the said Thibba suitable to her station, right? So that land and house do not exceed the said sum of £100. But if the manumission should not be secured, the above should be void. And then, in such case, I give unto the said Thibba the sum of £15 per annum during her life. So either she gonna be free for this 180 pounds, or she gonna get 15 pounds a year from his estate. To enable this to be done, he authorized the sale of his estate for the best monies obtainable to provide for all the above, and then the balance should go to three-fifths to Mr. William Thistlewood, son of my brother John Thistlewood in the country of Lincoln, and two-fifths to my niece Mary Annette, daughter of my said brother John Thistlewood. The will was signed by Thistlewood in the presence of Samuel Ben, William Hay Davis, and James Robertson Jr. Manumissions, Archives, Jamaica, Volume 7, page 119. John and Mary Cope manumit John Thistlewood, a mulatto slave, son of their Negro woman slave Phoeba, entry dated 3rd of May, 1762. No payment was recorded. I am grateful to Mr. Clinton Black, Jamaican Government Archivist, for this entry in a volume which, due to its fragile condition, is not available for search. Phoebe's manumission was secured on the 26th of November, 1792, so it took them almost 6 years to secure her manumission. On payment by Mr. William Tomlinson on behalf of Thistlewood's estate, 80 pounds currency to John, Mary, and Dorrell Cope, they did manumise, enfranchise, and from every tie of slavery or service set free a certain Negro woman slave named Phoeba to hold the said manumission, liberty, and enfranchisement, so thereby granted unto the said Phoeba and her future issue and increase. I have been unable to trace the purchase of land for Phoeba in the official records, but all things considered, it is fairly safe. It is a fairly safe assumption that she got her inheritance. Where does he draw that information from? And why would he draw that information to say that it is safe to assume that she got her inheritance? We don't know these people, but see, this is him bestowing benevolence and compassion upon these people. They held her in bondage for a whole 6 more years after the man died. Why is he so certain that she got her inheritance? But anyway, with the sale of the land and slaves of Breadnut Island Pen, it is a plausible supposition that she chose a piece of land in Darlaston Hills by Pertherton, where she would be near her daughter and granddaughter, House Frankie, and many other old friends from Egypt days. Jamaica Records Deeds Office, Volume 374, page 75. On August 19, 1789, Chase Payne, as sole executor, Thomas Anderson having gone to reside in Britain, sells to George Robert Gooden for 600 pounds currency all that settlement or pen commonly called and known by the name of Breadnut Island, containing 160 acres. And that is the end of Thomas Thistlewood and his diaries. So, what do you think? As we can see, he was an interesting man, because even as he is sick and dying, he still want to get him some, knowing that he's sick, knowing that he got a venereal disease. He continued to have sex with these pregnant women. He continued to copulate with them. I wonder what that was about. Was that about power and control? Was that him doing a different type of experiment? What was that about? Well, we are finally done with Mr. Thistlewood's diaries. We are going to do our next reading on Tuesday about slave drivers. We'll be reading the book by Randy M. Brown entitled The Driver's Story, and it's called Labor and Power in the World of Atlantic Slavery. So we will continue. Greetings, Bawana Hagaziki. How are you this evening?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good.
Good, good. I'm curious, Major. Who continued to run the Thistlewood plantation when he actually died?
I'm sorry, what did you say about the Thistlewood plantation?
Who continued the running of the Thistlewood plantation when Thistlewood died?
He sold it.
He sold it.
Right. They sold it
Oh,
to settle his debts and to get the money to free Fibba and to pay off his debts.
so so that included the slaves as well.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay. So another question I had is during that time, I think that they was having some kind of situation where plantations was not profitable for slave owners. So it would seem that many slavers was leaving Jamaica for better opportunities elsewhere. Is that so, or am I wrong
Yes.
about that?
You are
So
absolutely correct. Thistlewood even talked about that, that he was expecting all of these different plantations to change hands because the plantation economy wasn't profitable. Yep.
so what does that mean for the slaves? Because they were brought there now, this
Yeah.
generations later. So what would happen to the slaves since they no longer have that daily grind of living on the plantation? You just have to get it how they live there.
Well, a lot of them were sold, a lot of the enslaved populations were sold with the plantations, but they were sold in family groups. Some of them were sold apart. Some of them went to America. Some of them went further south to South America, to Suriname, and to Brazil. So they broke them up usually in family units. They tried to break them up in family units and they sold them up and down the river, up and down the ocean.
Interesting thing in terms of the river, because you mentioned the river. Um, some of Thistlewood slaves were fishermen.
Hmm.
So I would have thought, right? I would have thought if you're surrounded by all that ocean, what would stop me from just disappearing and not coming back?
Man, I asked myself that question many times. Like, even the ones that they talk about having run away or went out into the mountains. I don't know if it's that I know that they needed papers to board a ship, right? But some of them had access to things like canoes and ships and small craft enough to carry different cargoes up and down that particular waterway that were around them. So I don't know what prohibited them from taking one of those smaller crafts and running away and leaving and just going somewhere else, other than the fact that they were still mentally enslaved and felt like if they went somewhere else, um, it would be the same or they wouldn't have anywhere to go. There were also a lot of familial ties in Caribbean slave communities, which at this time, because they often tried to keep families together or they tried to uh, keep enslaved groups together if they had created familial ties, like whether it was one between plantation owners or between members of these different slave communities. So they also did not want to leave the people that they were tied to. So that was also a hindrance, but I
It's
don't know what
interesting.
stopped them.
Yeah, because I hear stories. especially in terms of the Haitian Revolution,
Hmm.
that Bookman was a Jamaican who actually came there via boat. So I'm thinking that obviously they had some idea of geography, the seas, boating. So and the islands are so close. The islands, so and well, I guess it was still in the 1700s, but during the 1800s, information would have probably spread to say, hey, this is an enclave of a bunch of black people who say that if you get here, you would be free. I'm sure
Hmm.
slaves talked among themselves. And
Hmm.
I'm sure that even African Americans, when they came south, they probably would have gotten on boats to try to make. I do know for certain, many of them made it to Andres in the Bahamas. I
Hmm.
do know that for certain. So I would have thought that some of them would have went to Haiti, because that would probably be the only place they could get away from this idea of enslavement. Because I have the philosophy in my head, even though you talk about family ties, anywhere is better than here. So even if I have to steal away with my family in the middle of the night, and I understand I'm surrounded by an ocean, I'm still trying to get away. The Haitians do it today. Some of the Haitians are in a desperate situation,
Hmm.
and they go on leaky boats in the dead of night trying to find other opportunities elsewhere. So, what if you were in a situation in contemporary times? Why wouldn't you do the same things under that situation where it was so treacherous? I don't understand. I
Exactly.
don't get that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you and understand. There had been generations of enslaved people born to the island by that time, but they lived a little bit longer. We think about it because some of his slaves were in their 30s and 40s, and Fibber lived to be a grandmother. So they had intergenerational knowledge transmission there for, at least on some of the plantations. So I would think that some of them did run off on those boats and that those stories are passed down in oral tradition because white people didn't want us thinking we could get free just by making it to the water. Because I think that that's where some of our Negro spirituals come from too, that wade in the water and things like
Yeah, 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 yeah,
that, you know.
yeah.
Because if you can get to the water and follow the river, if you can get to the water and follow the ocean, if you can get to the water and follow the path that the current carries you, you can get to freedom.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I gotta tell you, this book lived up to this title. This was a miserable accounting
Mm.
of slave life in Jamaica. It was really miserable. I mean, I would have never thought that slaves, if you was to walk onto a slave plantation, I mean, you are vulnerable to all kind of diseases. You
Mm.
watch these things 12 years a slave, and they never mention the fact that diseases because of the sexual activity you have with all kinds of people.
Mhm.
It's just crazy. It's just crazy. And also the testing or the inoculations, and the doctor continuously coming to the plantation, not only to check up the slaves, but they inject them with all kind of bullshit. It's
Mhm.
just, and then you talk about hunger, starvation. These things were not mentioned in these slave movies you watch. You don't
No.
think about slaves having to steal because they hungry, because the slaver wasn't feeding them.
Mhm.
It's never talked about, in
Mhm.
these movies. But good reading tonight, Matron. I'm glad this kind of book is kind of over because I was getting tired of Thistlewood. I really was,
Yeah.
man. It was bad. But
I was
I
getting tired
appreciate
of
the
Thistlewood too. I think we needed to hear his accounting because I think that that's why Derby, who wasn't eating well, kept getting shit shoved down his throat because Thistlewood wasn't feeding him well. And I found out today that there's something called a Derby pie, and it's coconut and chocolate mixed together. And I'm like, who would have thought? Now, in their community, that there are rumors of the Derby specialty of, Derby's punishment and things like that. But who would have thought to create something called a Derby pie?
just a sick individual.
Just a sick individual.
Just a sick motherfucker. Oh goodness, man. Oh goodness, man. But like I say, man, there has to be a recompense for all the shit these people have done,
Hmm.
and it has to be an accounting for it, man. These kinds of things can't go unpunished. And I know that we are currently living in an age where we are respectfully asking for justice in terms of reparations and things of that nature. But I think that it's gonna come a time that black people on this side of the world are gonna get tired of asking respectfully and start to take things, yeah, just like the pirates, like Thistlewood back in the day.
Well, we have to get to that point because if we don't get to that point, we'll never get the justice that we deserve. Do you know what I'm saying? Because unfortunately, they'll say things like, well, slavery was legal, so they weren't doing anything wrong. It was morally wrong. They'll say things like, we didn't break any laws. Well, laws can be unjust. Laws can be obtusely unjust, and they often are. They'll give us, well, it would bankrupt us to make you whole again. And that is my biggest concern, is that in economic uncertain times, they'll do things like say, sure, we'll give you all each $1 million, right? Or
Was
some,
worth nothing.
which is worth nothing exactly, and that is worth nothing once we get it.
Mm.
And then they can write in their history books that they paid African Americans reparations.
And told them sorry too.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh man, that's wicked. That's wicked. That's wicked.
Exactly. That is my biggest concern, because as we go through these economic uncertain times and the price of everything is going up and the dollar is losing value and all of these things are happening in a global space and the world is becoming more multipolar and other currencies are, rising up and surpassing the dollar at an incredible rate, they will give us the money and the money will be worthless. And we won't, because we have a high money consciousness in this paradigm that we're in, we won't do the right thing, which is immediately get the money and go buy hard assets like real estate, gold, different things like that. We will get the money and try to hold on to the money for money's intrinsic value. But we have to keep telling ourselves money only has value because they say so. And at the point that they say it doesn't have any value, what do you really have then? What do you
Nothing.
really exactly? What do
Mm-mm.
you have then? And we have to get to the point where we are passing that message on. Like I was explaining the concept of fiat money to my niece, and I said, "This dollar only has value because we all agree that it has value. It's not backed up by gold. You can't turn it in for widgets and whatnots or anything else. This dollar only has value because everybody that has dollars agrees that it has value." She said she asked the logical question. She's 14. She said, what happens if we decide that this doesn't have value? I said, then the whole game is up.
Uh, that's good. That's good that you are teaching her in terms of economics and the importance of economics and what it actually means. Because the children have a very curious mind. So
Hmm.
I'm thinking, what is a follow up to that question? Because it's like, okay, Auntie, since we can't use the dollar, what else can I use in terms of operating in the environment that I in to ensure that I'll be able to survive? What was your answer to her?
My answer to that was that she had to obtain skills that are marketable. So I told her to learn how to braid hair because people are always going to want their hair done. I told her that unfortunately, a gruesome one to go into was morticians. I told her that she could learn how to
People
grow.
always dying. That's right.
Yeah, people always dying. And I told her that she can learn how to grow food. And people will always trade with you for food because they need to eat. I said, but if you go into food, if you go into any type of consumable good that's not a skill you hold on into your head, then you have to also learn how to shoot a gun well because people will always come and try to steal the food that you get. And she looked
Absolutely.
at me
Spot on.
like,
Understand.
wow, yeah. She looked at me like, wow, you really put it down like that. And I'm like, yeah, it's just like that.
Yeah. She yeah, and he teaching her how to think critically, and that's a good thing. And defending yourself is a good thing. You know, there's no doubt about it.
Mhm.
Defending, nothing wrong with defending yourself. Nothing wrong with defending yourself. Absolutely nothing at all. So, you know, you should preach that narrative to her. That's very good. But like I say, I'm actually happy this one is over, and hopefully the next one is um it goes a little bit quicker because I know a lot of Thistle was writing is so detailed.
Mhm.
Oh goodness, man, it gets in the weeds sometimes. But I
Mhm.
know as a sociopath, you know, they do them kind of things, like thinking things are important when it's not. Or why do I want to know how much time you slept with Phoebe? Why is that
Right.
important? You know,
I
but
think he was trying to make more slaves because when he puts down things like their birthdays and he puts down when he slept with them, when you count back, sometimes some of those children were his children that were dying. And I'm wondering if some of these enslaved women were like, I'm not going to make a baby for this cracker.
oh, definitely, I'm sure that they was unaliving their children. I'm sure that
Hmm.
that happened. I'm sure that that happened. I'm
Hmm.
sure that that happened. But he was a wicked man, man. He was a wicked evil monster, no doubt about it. But like I say, thank you. I really appreciate the time in this reading because it took a while, but I appreciate your time in reading this. And as you say, the next book is going to be about the Bakra, and
Hmm.
hopefully that goes a little bit smoother in
Hmm.
terms of the language of the book
Yes.
itself. You know, but
Yes.
I'll leave it there for the night. I know it's very late, it's 12 o'clock, so we'll just leave it there.
Well, thank you so much. And I thank you, like I said again, for suggesting this book and for us to, have an opportunity to go through it and to discuss it. We need that this information. I think that there's a more modern way to express the story. Um, because some of the things that he said, like you said, he had sex and where he had sex with them and that it wasn't good and things like that. And it's like, who cares? Who like what was your point? What was the reason you put this in the text in your diary? And what was the reason? And I think the author over time got tired of documenting because he was probably going line by line and seeing, his daily goings ons, and he began to summarize these things, and he began to put these things in a more genteel way to say, well, he had sex with her this many times during this period of time, so
Mm,
that we then could not go back and count to see, well, if she got pregnant in January and she brought to bed a baby boy in September or October, that was Thistlewood's child.
mm,
So, there are some things that the author deliberately began to do to humanize Thistlewood and to put him in a different light and to cast him in a different light. It's like Sister Ross says, many lies being told by that Caucasoid for show. He say, me say all lies to make himself look like a good massa. And I think that that is what was happening in the text, that he was trying to humanize Thistlewood as time went on because this is the end of his life, and we're not going to itemize his sexual exploits as he is sick and dying, documenting his symptoms of these putrid diseases that he had. He's still having sex, and he's having sex with impregnated women. So the babies, could even if they weren't his children, given gotten and that were obtained while he was infected, that now it's in their birth canal, and he is poisoning the children as
it,
they come out into the world.
yeah, it was a poison pill, and the English and the French are notorious for putting poison pills in their colonies. You know,
Hmm.
whether you call it parliamentary democracy or
Hmm.
biological warfare, they don't just leave. They don't just die. They have to give the person who they was over the poison pill so the rest of you could die as well. And this is the thing where I feel the death of white narcissism. I feel like white narcissism will not go quietly into the night. You know,
Mm-mm.
they will do something to leave a poison pill for the world to have to rectify and to solve because they will not die quietly into the night. We all concerned about that. we
Yeah.
are concerned about that. But needless to say, like again, thank you, matron, once again, and take care, sister. And you coming back on Tuesday, right?
I'll be back on Tuesday reading the driver's story. If you haven't already, listen to the partial introduction that I did. It's like 20, 30 minutes long. And because I'm going to pick up from that point and I'm going to go from that point on.
I see, I see. Okay, well, I should be here on Tuesday to see what you got.
All
Okay,
right.
all
All
right,
right.
take care.
Thank you. You take care too. I want to thank Bawana Haguziki, Sister Raw, and the elders, KW Don 7, the Forecast Radio, Anthony McPhail, as well as Redo 9002. Redo 9002. I want to thank each and every one of you for being here. I know that Koku from the Bitter Medicine Podcast is listening. Kofi from the from Kofi the Black Critic is listening. Cassidra Cheek from the Cassidra Cheek Show is listening. Brother Bakari is listening, and so many others. I want you to know that I value your time and your consideration for coming to share this broadcast with me. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe to the program, and we will be back on Tuesday reading the driver's story. It's in 6 parts, so it'll go a little bit faster. Thank you for being here and peace.